In the presence of a quorum, I will call the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:33 on October 11th. We'll take a quick roll call vote. Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess present.
Margaret?
Margaret present.
Peter?
Peter present.
Craig?
Craig present.
Jennifer?
Jennifer present.
Allison?
Allison present.
And Ben also present.
All right, and seeing the presence of a quorum, I'll call this meeting of Union 26 to order. And we'll start with roll call attendance just like we did. Allison?
Allison present.
Sarah?
Sarah present.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess present.
We also have Ron Menino and Irv Rhodes who are not here at the moment, but we'll loop them in if they join. So on to our one item of business for Union 26, jointly with the region superintendent increment for FY23. Ben, do you want me to cue this up? Okay, so by contract with the superintendent, every year for every July 1st, the Regional School Committee and Union 26 confer with the superintendent and then set the annual salary increase. So after having met with the superintendent to confer with that, our committees have agreed to an annual salary increase of 2% effective July 1st, 2022. So we are here to vote that. So that's pretty much it. So it would be a motion to increase the superintendent's salary by 2% to a new value of 173,611 effective 7/1/22. So any comments or discussion? Yeah, Allison.
No discussion other than to say I support it given the evaluations that this committee gave Mike in the spring. I think 2% is warranted given the preponderance of positive evaluation comments for the superintendent. So 2% seems in line with that for me, from my perspective.
Any other comments or discussion before we, Sarah and then Jennifer?
Everything Allison just said, but for Pelham.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Jennifer?
Already passed. Has the super yet received the pay raise, and will he receive that amount retro?
So you broke up a little there. So I'll try and paraphrase what I think your question was has the superintendent already received the increase or is it retroactive? So it would be retroactive to July 1st, 2022. Hopefully I captured your question correctly. I got about 40% of your, Jennifer's on a plane tonight and doing her best to logistically dial in. So we appreciate that. Yeah, Jennifer again. So I heard one word and it wasn't able to make out what you're saying. You could, if you wanted to, if you have access to, you could put it, your comment in the chat and we could read it aloud so that we could, given that you're thousands of feet in the air at the moment. I'm not sure if anybody else heard the comment. All right, so we'll just give it like another minute to see if, I just want to make sure that, Jennifer says all set. Okay. All right. So with that, I guess I will make a motion. I move to increase the superintendent, this is for Unit 26, I should clarify. I move to increase the superintendent's annual salary by 2% to 173,611 effective July 1st, 2022.
Second.
Moved by Demling, seconded by Hall. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. Allison?
Allison, I.
Sarah Beth?
Sarah Beth, aye.
Sarah?
Sarah, I.
And Peter, I. So it is unanimous on Unit 26, 4-0. And I will turn it over to Ben to do the regional vote. And I will first call on Allison.
I move that the region approve the proposed increase of 2% to Mike's salary.
Second.
All right, moved by Allison, seconded by Margaret. We will take a roll call vote. I'll start with Sarah Beth,
Sarah Beth, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, I.
Craig,
Craig, aye.
Peter,
Peter, I.
Allison,
Allison, I.
and while we have Jennifer,
Jennifer, I.
and Ben, the motion passes unanimously, and that's that.
All right, with that, I'll move to adjourn Union 26.
Second.
Moved by Demling, seconded by Hall. Roll call vote. And Sarah Beth.
Sarah Beth, aye.
Allison.
Allison, I.
Sarah?
Sarah, I.
And Peter, I. Our second unanimous vote of the night. Look how efficient we are. Union 26 is adjourned. I hand it off to you, Mr. Ben.
All right. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Night.
See ya. All right, so we will move on to approval of the minutes. Did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes from September 27th? Anyone have any additions, corrections, or addendum to? Allison.
Yeah, I have a couple. One is on the talking about the discussion on the bus schedule. Bottom of page 2, I think, and top of page 3. There was a missing any mention of the comments that I offered, and not that I think that I said anything so earth-shatteringly important, but except for one suggestion was to consider the comment about considering changing the region start time by 5 minutes, and sort of that conversation about how did we land at 9 a.m. as the start time. I watched the recording. There were a few other things, but I think that's the only reason why I would want that noted in the minutes was that comment there. And I didn't look at if anybody responded to that. On the CREST discussion, there was a typo in my comments that the word than, THAN, should be that, THAT. And then in the 6th grade discussion, I think it's important to note after the comments that Irv made that were specifically about the 6th grade curriculum and structure, that we're not, that after that, Mike made a comment about OML, given that is not a topic for region, but for the Amherst Elementary School Committee. And I think that's important to note in the minutes.
Yeah, I agree. Right. Were there any other additions or corrections? Peter.
Yeah, just also on the transportation item, I also would like if in the minutes, it's some paraphrasing of the comment I had, which was basically, I'd like to see this resolved sooner rather than earlier, because while we have an obligation to provide transportation for the elementary districts of Leverett and Shutesbury, we don't have an obligation to provide exactly what's preferred, and that we need to resolve the issue for the region students. Doesn't have to be exactly that comment, but just something to that effect would be good.
Something to that effect. Got that. All right. Anyone else? Then I will entertain a motion. Or I will just move to approve minutes as adjusted, perhaps, from September 27th, 2022.
I'll second.
Alrighty, moved by me, seconded by Craig. We'll take a roll call vote. Sarah Bess,
Sarah Beth, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, I.
Craig,
Craig, aye.
Peter,
Peter, I.
Jennifer. Allison
Allison, I.
and Ben, aye. Motion passes unanimously. We'll move to public comments. I don't have any emails or voicemails. I'll look around the room to see if we have anyone present here. You can go ahead and raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you.
I think we all received an email. Let me just get to it. Oh boy. Regarding the 6th grade, is that appropriate to read tonight?
Let me check in.
It would have to be specifically noted as this is for public comment.
Okay, it's not written there. It's just a question to the school committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't see any. Is there anyone who is present in the room that would like to make a public comment? All right, so as a reminder, members of the public who would like to submit public comments to the committee can do so by sending an email message or an audio of their public comments to school committee public comment at scpubliccomment@arps.org or by leaving a voicemail at 413-362-1891. Regardless of method, the comments need to be submitted by 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting with the subject listed as public comment. The messages should also include their full name and town of residence. Public comments will either be shown on the screen for viewing or played at the meeting for no more than 3 minutes per comment. All public comments submitted will become part of the public record. And we will move on to the superintendent's update.
Sure. Try to be brief. On the topic of emails, just for folks to know, when emails go to the school committee and I respond, I typically respond to the person who wrote the email and then the chair of the relevant committee. I typically don't respond to the full committee because of OML potential issues. So just I want to acknowledge Craig's comment and that was responded to, but not everyone would have seen it because I can't email everyone. So in this case, Ben was CC'd on my reply. On to the update. Again, tonight will be brief. I want to thank Marita Bonda and staff at the high school and our students at the high school because our Best Buddies program has come back in full force. I think today was the 3rd meeting of the year, which is, the year's not that, it hasn't been going that long, but highly successful. Lots of students, lots of pizza, and great time had by all. Best Buddies is a national program that we have a branch of that works with students who have significant disabilities and connects them with other peers who do not have such significant disabilities or disabilities at all to build positive relationships. And it's been shown that it's beneficial for everyone who's involved. So you need a faculty member to spearhead it, and Marita's that faculty member this year, and her communication to families and staff has been outstanding as well. So I want to publicly thank Marita for that work because it's critically valuable to our students. Everyone who participates. Since the last time we met, high school had their open house. It was full house, really, really successful. And For those of you who don't know, that parents have access to their children's schedule and can follow along and meet the different teachers along the way, and really gives people a sense of what their students are working on, what their children are working on, and building those relationships that we know is so important to the school. So thank you to all the high school staff who weathered a long evening a couple Thursdays ago. It's, just the feedback I've heard from families has been incredibly positive. So thank you for that. We had the last meeting recently, let's see, it was last Wednesday or Thursday, of the regional assessment. There was a working group looking at the idea of kind of limits. Last year we used 4%. So Doug facilitated that group. I want to thank Doug for that work. And as it is a working group, really, it was to give information so the member towns could go back to their member committees, in all 4 communities, and talk about the concept of guardrails and what they want to do moving forward. We wanted to be really clear. No decisions were made. In fact, at the end, I just said, does everyone have what they need? Because, right, that we've exhausted our purpose. And everyone at the meeting, all 4 towns represented, felt like they did have what they need to bring back to their member towns. So I was glad we did this in advance of a 4-town meeting. That's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of two months from now. And but I really want to thank Doug for answering many of the questions, and also providing information to member towns moving forward. So that was positive work. That was kind of a decision that was made in the last 4-town meeting last year, that we would come back to it, and we did. And I think the loop's closed on our end now, and it's up to the towns to have discussions and move forward with that. Later this week, both the middle school and high school will have ALICE training. So if those of you don't know, ALICE is an acronym. It's a recommended protocol by our state and beyond around safety situations that can come up in a school. And so the idea is, if we ever did need to go into a lockdown, we did have a safety situation, it gives the adults and the students, especially at the high school level, more tools to support themselves and more tools to be active instead of just going to a corner as the default mechanism. We did this training for a number of years before COVID. We took a pause with COVID for some obvious reasons. And as we're now in our 2nd year fully back in person, reconnecting, there's a new trainer from the Amherst Police Department who is licensed to train. So all of our schools will be undergoing it, but they met with our leadership team in the summer, and again, early in the fall, and we're really excited to be back at it. We've also included Amherst Recreation in some of that work, and today we had a meeting with Amherst Recreation staff about safety across the middle school building, because what happens in the middle school affects Amherst Recreation, and Amherst Recreation has an open door, as they should. It's well locked off from the rest of the school, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to have conversations about safety with those folks, and they'll be attending one of the trainings later this week. And, just that continued collaboration. They're wonderful partners with us in all sorts of ways, but when it comes to safety, staff have changed over on our end, on their end, and it's been good to be reconnecting with them on the front of safety. And I think my last update is just, I've been able to get out to a couple athletic events the last week or two. And I've just really been impressed with not just our student athletes, but also the fans in the crowd. I think, as athletics has reemerged and we don't have limits on, who goes, there's been certainly no shortage of incidents across the country and locally about fan behavior. And what I'm hearing from both Ms. Stewart, but also what I'm witnessing is that our students are really coming to the games to cheer on their teams. They're very aware of boundaries at games. And I know these seem like simple things, but they're not. Especially when you have a large crowd in the evening at an athletic event with some rival teams on the other side. So just really want to compliment us. We definitely had some challenges in the past with that pre-COVID, and as some schools have come back post-COVID, those challenges have reemerged, and to date we have not witnessed or seen that. Part of that's to do with the students, and part of it again is due to Ms. Stewart and her work and her staff's work to make sure that the focus is on celebrating the kids in the field and not the other things that unfortunately do come up as you go to athletic events. Many of you have gone to athletic events, whether it's for youth sports or adult sports, and they don't always engender the kind of fan behavior that's desired. But so far so good this fall, and just want to say I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed seeing our student athletes and seeing their dedication, but also seeing the families and students and there for support in wins and losses, and I think that matters as well. So really enjoyed it and just wanted to pass that along. And that is the end of my update for this evening.
Do you have any questions or comments? Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, just briefly, so I appreciate the effort that's being put into the guardrails discussion in advance of the Four Towns meeting. Obviously, anything we can do for dialogue and discussion of any aspect of assessment method is appreciated and productive. I think particularly with trying to set, cross our fingers, steady state, for a number of years going forward. It's really important to explain the mechanisms of how these guardrails might work to the broader audience at the Four Towns meeting. I think it's really, this particular topic is really susceptible to misinterpretation about fairness to individual towns, about one town paying the share of the other, etc. And if it's one thing for if people want to have come to different value judgment conclusions about the same facts of the mechanism, but it's a discussion where in my attempts to explain it to residents and to town officials, it's pretty difficult to manage, because you have the assessment method up, and then the guardrails just add another layer of complexity on that, when really it's designed to simplify things. So something that could go off the rails, haha, pun intended. But as always, anything we can do to clarify that presentation would be, I think, really productive.
And Allison.
I have two things. Just one, I will have attended the open house at the high school myself. Will add my compliments and thanks to the team over there. It was tremendous, and one of the things that I noticed different than in past years, including the last time I was there for an in-person one, was that added half hour at the end of the evening in order to be able to go visit either second semester classes, which wasn't an issue pre-COVID because we didn't have the block schedule, but it is important for families that have more than one student in the high school. And maybe not both parents can be there, or there aren't two parents or caregivers. So it was really a nice opportunity, and to be able to go back and meet more of my kids' teachers, having two kids at the high school right now. And my other one is a question about Best Buddies. I'm familiar with that on the national level, and so I'm excited to hear that it's back up and running here. You mentioned that they had a meeting today, and I'm just curious, given the conversation that we're going to have later on in this evening, does a program like that meet after school or during school? How does that work?
It is an after-school club, so it doesn't meet during school, but they've a broad attendance of all parties, so to speak. So yeah, it's an after-school group.
Any more questions or comments for the superintendent? All right, we will move on to the chair's update. And I don't have so much of an update as I just want to acknowledge that today is National Coming Out Day. It's the 34th anniversary. And so for all the folks who are out, who came out, and those who aren't ready yet, I just want to extend my unwavering support. And now I will look to school committee announcements, and I'll start with Allison. Or did Margaret get a hand up first? We'll go with Margaret.
Mine is very short. I just wanted to say that the budget survey will go out next week. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a very brief budget subcommittee meeting to talk about a survey for the students, because what we have now is not for the students. So that's it.
Thank you. And now Allison.
Just the negotiation subcommittee is meeting tomorrow evening for our third mediation session with the APEA. And I just wanted to share aloud a statement that we were contacted by the Gazette about an article that they were working on and asked if we wanted to respond. And so the negotiating subcommittee did respond, and this statement was shared with the Gazette as well as the full regional committee over the weekend. And I just wanted to share that also in public. I haven't seen the article published yet. I'll read it super quickly because I think folks can read and follow along. But the regional subcommittee began bargaining with the 3 units of the Amherst Pelham Educators Association, or the APEA, representing teachers, paraeducators, and clerical staff in interest-based bargaining style in December of last year. In early February, the APEA indicated that they did not want to continue in IBB, and the negotiations moved to traditional bargaining to work towards contract ratification. Our groups began meeting in March in traditional bargaining, which involves each party developing and presenting proposals and counterproposals until agreement is reached. In their original proposal, the APEA requested compensation increases totaling over $3 million per year, more than $2.4 million over what the school districts had budgeted. Although our talks last spring focused on attempting to move toward a sustainable compromise solution that is more compatible with what our district and towns can afford, the APEA presented a new proposal at the end of June that included compensation increases totaling over $15 million per year. That proposal was an increase of $12 million over their original proposal and $14.4 million more than what was available in the district budgets that by then had been approved by member towns. Our towns cannot afford that level of increase in funding for schools, and our districts can't afford that level of compensation increase within the available funding without severe cuts to staffing and programs. The total average annual increase in tax revenues in Amherst, Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury combined is millions of dollars less than the increases the APEA requested just for the first year alone. Even if the districts used all of the remaining federal COVID funds or ESSER one-time grants, the district still could not meet the first year increases that the APEA requested. After more than 6 months of negotiations, the parties were even farther from agreement than when we started. The Regional School Committee therefore filed a petition for mediation with the Department of Labor Relations. It also filed an unfair labor practice charge against the APEA for failing to fulfill its legal obligation to bargain in good faith. On July 11th, the DLR agreed with the Regional School Committee, finding that our negotiations were at an impasse. The unfair labor practice matter is still pending. The DLR assigned mediator began by attempting to schedule meetings. Although the Regional School Committee indicated it was available for multiple proposed meeting dates proposed in August, the APEA did not respond, and our first mediation meeting was not scheduled until September 12th. At that meeting, only a small number of the APEA's prior bargaining team elected to participate. Just as with traditional bargaining, there is no limit to the number of participants or silent observers that either party may invite to mediation sessions. The parties met with the mediator again on September 21st. Again, the APEA elected to have only a small part of its team present. The second meeting was canceled by the mediator after only a few minutes because the APEA was not prepared. Our next meeting is Wednesday, October 12th, which is tomorrow evening. We look forward to reaching a compromise agreement with the APEA that continues to provide the highly competitive compensation for our teachers and staff, is compatible with what our district and towns can afford, and that provides the level of educational programs and services that our communities expect. And this was signed by me on behalf of the full negotiating subcommittee.
Thank you very much. And do we have any other announcements? All right. So we will move on to the late start survey results.
Yep, and I'll do a summary of them. Pull that up. So these were compiled by Margot Peterson, who was our intern in the summer from Amherst College. And we got a great response rate. And so we tried to piece through the data with the most relevant pieces because, there's hundreds and hundreds of responses and lots of written pieces. So thanks to Margot for doing this. And, in general, you could see the overview that, we collected them, and this is what we were asking for, is that right now in Amherst and Pelham, we have 8:10 as our elementary start time and 9 o'clock for our middle school and high school. And you can see the number of responses that we received. Again, totals about 1,000, a little over 1,000. So here's some of the themes that we express. I'm not going to read all the points in the slides, but the change in start times is I consider net positive by most of the majority of our stakeholder groups, and that's true across stakeholder groups. There's definitely differences within stakeholder groups, but in general, people were generally positive about it for some of the reasons that we assumed would be true about the mental and physical health. And that there were also concerns. There were concerns about the secondary dismissal being too late, challenge of the sports clubs, work, things like that. There was an impact on elementary staff in Amherst and Pelham. This is not that committee, so I won't harp on those tonight. And staff expressed more concerns than parent caregivers or students. Again, broadly supportive, but their concerns were a bit different among stakeholder groups, as I indicated before. So from the qualitative results, what the benefits were, again, very much aligned with what research says: improved sleep, mental, physical health, and that the A block for high school students, and this is one of the critical pieces we talked about when proposing this change, is more effective. So, we asked a question on the survey that asked students, but particularly asked teachers. I put a lot of stock in this one. How tired and sleepy, essentially, how effective is your A block? A block being the first period of the day. In other words, are students coming in on time? Are they alert? Are they able to learn? And there was a significant difference expressed by all groups, but particularly the one focused on teachers. So you could see that, we have much higher than the national averages when they survey about reporting student reports of getting enough sleep. And, the families of those students are saying that it's contributing to their well-being. And, right, the staff piece, which I was just referencing, over two-thirds of staff, close to 3/4 agree or strongly agree that the students are more alert in the first 2 periods of the day than was the case in the earlier start time. This was really interesting to me, how many hours of sleep the students get, right? We don't have baseline data from before the change, which is unfortunate because that would be really interesting to compare. But I'm really happy to see that, I would love the blue box or the blue wedge to be larger. But if you look nationally, this compares favorably to national averages on sleep. Now, ideally, students would be getting more sleep. Ideally, probably all of us here would be getting more sleep than we're actually getting. But, all we can do is compare to national averages, which would indicate that the kind of 4 to 6 band would be larger than 15%. And so I find that heartening, and there's room for growth as well. And then you could see, this is all respondents. What do you think about this year's school start time? And again, over 3/4, it's either great or good start time. And so that's good news. But then you see the differences between the students, the parent caregivers, and the staff. Everyone, the majority agrees it's good or great start time, but there's parent caregivers are most supportive. And then you have students and staff, again, majority feeling like it's good or great, but not at the same level as parent caregiver. So just important to note those differences, even though the trends are the same among groups. So some of the concerns about secondary school dismissal is too late on after school activities, and students being tired at the end of the day. And we definitely have that from the qualitative data of the survey, as well as qualitative responses that just naturally have come up. And then the challenge for the secondary staff, unable to provide, the extra help time after school. And the plus block is an effort to kind of get at some of that at the end of the day. And so I really appreciate the high school's creativity to create a block of time where we can provide ongoing support at the end of the day for students. Impact on after school activities. So it is somewhat, right? And so over 50% of students who participate in them said that it does affect them. And I think that is worthy of note and something that we continue to look at. You know, we improve the light situation, so we have more capacity to do night games, but not every game is at home. And not every high school has capacity as it relates to sports. So that is a trade-off that we knew going in. And I think this often, you know, pretty much confirms what we maybe expected going in, that it would have an impact, and the mitigating factors were worth it. To me, I feel the same way as I felt before the change was made. Impact on staff. So, you know, pretty even split in terms of has a positive impact on the personal schedule, you know, out of school, and then a positive impact for me. And you could see it's remarkably even in those 4 wedges on both of these questions. And some of this is so dependent on people's personal situation outside work. How old are your kids? When do your kids' school start? Do you have kids in this district versus another district? So, you know, what I gather from this is people have really different experiences in their lives outside of school, and that impacts how this change, how they experience this change. So it's rare that you ask a question and you have relatively even responses across 4 categories, 4 descriptors, but that's what we found when it related to staff. Again, I'll skip over the elementary pieces as this is a regional meeting, but that, you know, what we found is that you know, more students are seeking academic help before school, but it's not the same as after school. And again, that's why we created and are continue to refine the plus block to provide that additional support after school day. So the plus block, I should go back up for people who aren't aware, is a block of time from roughly 3 to 3:30 that tries to, in some ways, simulate some additional supports. So it's an academic block, but it's not an academic, you know, there's no curriculum beyond supporting students with academic support. So it's our way to try to accommodate that very real need. This was an interesting question. We learned maybe we offered too many choices, but and I'm sorry, it's hard to read, but we asked what would be the best schedule. And so about 53% said the current schedule, but there was no clear winner from the other choices given. In fact, no other choice received even 10% of support. Right, that old Churchill quote about democracy, right, might be better than everything else, even if there's problems with it. And I think that's sort of where we are with the schedule, but still fascinating data plot. And another question or differently asked, although all things considered, the current school schedule is in the best interest of the school community. And we had over 70%, and I'll remind people the zip code, perhaps 70% say that they did believe it was in the best. And for us, that is pretty strong evidence of support for the schedule that we currently have. And you can see there's some differences, some variance by type, by staff, student, or caregiver, but in every scenario, it was supported. The current schedule was supported more than other schedules, and you can see on the student, it was 2 to 1. Parent caregiver much more significant than that, and staff was a little more split. So feedback on improving the schedule. So consider slightly earlier start time at the secondary level for all the reasons we mentioned earlier. I think I don't have to rehash the conversation from 2 weeks ago that has the domino effect on the elementary level with transportation that is hard to resolve, but I don't disagree with the comment. Sure, buses arrive on school on time. Seems a good predictor for our conversation 2 weeks ago on that front. And the staff is really focused on the elementary feedback. This is, again, I'm not going to go over this, but this is who responded to the survey, so you can get the scatter plot of that. And the racial demographics, which thought were important, wasn't perfectly distributed based on race, gender, age level, other pieces. This is a summary of how we communicated the survey out and the survey methods. And I think the limitation, we learned that some of the choices we made were pre-K to 8 and 9 to 12. And so Margot did a great job sort of parsing through that on an individual response level to add some additional analysis. And not all survey questions were required. It's always hard when you're doing survey work. If you require all questions, for some, that's a disincentive for them to complete it. But if you don't, then your data gets a little funky because you have different responses, different numbers of respondents for different questions. And that is the end of this summary presentation about start times. I know we were trying to do this a little bit earlier this summer or fall, but since we weren't changing it, I think this was a reasonable approach. I also thought it really connected to our conversation 2 weeks about transportation, but I will stop here and see if there's any questions or comments from the committee that they'd like to share.
Allison, go ahead.
Thank you. I just first want to compliment Margot for a really fabulous presentation and sort of going through all of that data and sort of distilling out sort of some of the key highlights in there in a really digestible way. So kudos and thank you. One question there that I had is actually on page 12. That the pie graph on that is labeled that it's the question, more students are seeking academic help before school than was the case with the earlier start time. And I don't know if that is supposed to connect to one of the bullet points to the left, but not seeing the full data, I would argue that that actually is not an accurate conclusion from that pie graph, because saying more students are seeking than before does not translate to most students right now are not seeking help. So I think unless there's another data point that captured that, then I would request that we change that, because this is sort of a public record and I feel like that's really inaccurate. And that said, I wish, kind of what you commented, Mike, about sort of there's some baseline data that in hindsight would, I helped you concoct this survey, and I feel like, oh gosh, yeah, we should have asked some questions. Sort of, it would have been helpful to have had some baseline information. But one of the things that occurs to me, I'm glad you mentioned the plus block, because I know that the plus block was implemented partway through the school year last year in order to specifically address this concern about time for additional help, as well as the impact for athletes in particular. And having an athlete, I know that was really helpful on several occasions when they had to go to away meets. So they weren't missing an academic class and instruction. But I also understood, and I'm not sure how much weight I personally would put on this question about seeking academic help, because the other difference is not just the start time, but the block schedule, which makes for much longer class periods. And just anecdotally, the students, my students and their friends are, report that they have a lot of time during the regular class time to get extra help and to work on their homework and to work with peers and their teachers on that. So, again, in hindsight's 2020, that would have been a question. Maybe the more appropriate question is, do you have enough time to get the help you need from teachers, as opposed to when do you do it during the day? Because I think the question is not when did you do it, but are you getting the help that you need and want? And then my comment was also about clubs, because my understanding is clubs are still meeting after school, and that's left. So it's not that they're not meeting. So I was just sort of curious if there was any insight as to what about the schedule is impacting participation in clubs.
If I could respond briefly. So yes, on the first point, that is what you said was accurate, and I'll make that edit. So thank you. I think the club piece, I think it's more that it's the time of day, right? And I think, you think about now, it's starting to get dark earlier, and when you get to December, and it's dark really early, and just, it's not that people can't meet and do clubs when it's dark, but I think just it feels like the end of the day at 3:45 when the buses run, and and then you get out at 4:40 and it's pitch black, and I feel it, and so I want to just acknowledge that, when I get out at the same time in September as I get in December for my job, one of them feels a lot later than the other. And, I think a lot of our academic year, it's gets dark early, living in New England. So I do think that contributes to how it feels. And I want to honor and respect that piece. I think the extra help piece is an interesting conversation. I think the thing I would broaden it is, and you can think of this in any number of ways, but I think the old system involved students to show up after school if they wanted help. And the upside is they got really small group, and a lot of teacher attention in small group. The upside of the current model is that everyone has access to that, both in class, as you noted, Ms. Allison, because of the extended period, and then at the end of the day. And so it has democratized that, but it also increases group size. And so, I'm not saying one's better than the other, but there is a substantive difference from the old model to the new model of how students access help. And I think for some students that's working great. And I think they're getting more support if they either couldn't or wouldn't stay after school for that. And for other students who really love that kind of like 3-on-1 or 4-on-1 time with the teacher, there's a real loss there. So, I think there is, I like the reframing that you said of the survey that we worked on together. So I'll own my part in that as well. But I do think there's a difference. Just for me, qualitatively, I wouldn't put one as better than the other, but I do want to acknowledge that.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, no questions, just some brief comments. So it's really great to see such a robust survey show such strong positive results. That's pretty unusual for this large of a change in its early years. But I found particularly the overwhelming positive response from parents and students who are traditionally harsh graders on school changes, because they're the ones that have to live through it directly, with the level of positive reaction. So to see that, and also the very concrete benefits that we talked about why we were doing this in terms of sleep and the A block quality, it's really great to see. So big kudos. And it's not just like half a dozen people responding in. This is a really great response rate. So it's really great to see that. I was actually more encouraged by the staff response than maybe is presented. So on the impact on staff slide, with the question, I found that the current start time has had a positive impact on my personal schedule. So if you're a staff member who felt like, it was fine either way, didn't really have a big swing either way, you would answer disagree on that because it didn't have a positive impact, right? So it's like a different question would have been, was it positive, neutral, or negative? And so I don't read that 51% on the left of that pie chart as like this was a bad change. I read it as it wasn't necessarily or hasn't necessarily been for me a positive change yet. So that being said, I'm glad that you initiated the A block, the plus block earlier rather than later, and being responsive to the needs that that staff are talking about. Obviously, talk about the elementary stuff at a different committee. And I also appreciate the juxtaposition of starting a little earlier being inherently at odds with the other problem that we haven't solved, which is getting all the buses to school on time. So as a school committee member, I appreciate the extra motivation for solving that problem soon.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions or comments? All right. We'll move on to the enrollment report. Were you going to share that, or?
I'll bring it up.
Small enough.
Okay. And so yep, there it is. So what you see is the fall enrollment update. It says as October 1st. October 1st is a big day because that's when our it's a big state reporting date. It's where enrollments get locked in. It's where, choice charter numbers are effective as, and it's where funding comes from. When you look at the funding formula, it's what was your October 1st enrollment. So we have at the middle school 380 students right now, down 32 students from a year ago. That was kind of projected. And I think in a different conversation about sixth grade to the middle school, having that lower number really promotes space needs being ameliorated. Out of those students, 9 of those students come in for services only, special ed services only. So in terms of students who are actually on a team, it's 371 students right now. At the high school, We're actually up a student from a year ago. We projected, I think we shared this, we projected many fewer students, but we had many students move into our district unanticipated over the summer. And so we've had to make adjustments to accommodate for that. The current team size at the middle school, you see at 7th grade, 77 and 109. The 109 is that Uber team with 2 additional core teachers. And in 8th grade, 92 and 93 at 2 teams. These are significantly lower than last year. So our class size at the middle school is lower than it was a year ago because we have the same staffing model and 32 fewer students. So that is helpful for class size. The high school courses report, I'm not going to summarize, but that link is there. It goes over every course offered in the high school, the enrollment, those pieces. There's a plethora of data in that report. And the other thing that I'll present is the high school course is not offered because of low enrollment, computer programming with Java, and computer programming, data analysis, and VIS. And I think it's worth noting that we've added computer programming classes, including AP Computer Science. And so while it looks like, oh, people aren't interested in computer science, what we found is they're just happen to be interested in the courses we added more than the courses that while they weren't intended as replacements, they've functioned as such to a certain extent. So we do have a wide range of computer science classes, and you can see that in the course report. So I don't want that data to be misinterpreted as our students aren't interested in that topic. Far from it. It's that we've added other classes and other sections. And we don't run classes with low or no enrollment. And so every year we share that information with the full committee. I certainly can talk to the high school courses report to a certain extent, but I do want to note that you know, there's a lot of detailed information there. Talib can't be here tonight. I think there's a PGO meeting or coffee or something like that that the high school is doing, but I can do my best if there's any questions on that. But that is the enrollment update that we have for this evening.
All right, so I will take Allison, then Peter, and then Margaret.
Mine's just super quick. On the previous page, the low enrollment, it said there was a digit 2 and a digit 0 at the end of it. What does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said those are the number of students who enrolled for those 2 courses. So we don't run courses with 2 people. Or 0, I guess. That one's more obvious. But
yeah, I'm sorry. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for this. I like seeing this at this point of the year. One observation on the ARMS enrollment is down 32 students from a year ago. I think it's important for the public's understanding of how the enrollment fluctuates to remember that, you know, at the end of the year, when you have a 7th and an 8th grade, the 8th grader cohort leave to become 9th graders, and then they're replaced with the 6th graders. So if you have a larger 9th grade cohort leaving and a smaller 6th grade cohort coming in, you are by definition going to drop students, even at the same rate of parents choosing ARMS, right? So like I looked at the DESE numbers this morning, and last year there were 217 8th graders at the middle school, and there were combined between Amherst, Pelham, Leavitt, and Shutesbury 196 6th graders. So that's 21 students right there, right off the top, if all you do is replace those 2 cohorts. And so then there's like another 10 or 11 who were 6th graders that haven't matriculated to ARMS, which is like a 95% matriculation rate, which I think is pretty good. I would have to go back and look at, you know, what historically has it been to say whether it's been above or below. You probably know better, but I think that's, you know, fundamentally what's going on here with the ARMS number. I mean, correct me if you have different interpretation. Is that, you know, there are population fluctuations in the cohorts, and so just naturally as you go through, because it's a 2-year school, you're going to get that big swing as the cohorts go plus and minus. The other thing I want to ask you about is do we have early data on charter enrollment, or would you want to present that at a different time?
yeah, so on your first point, that's spot on. This is exactly, you know, I shouldn't say exactly. This is more or less what we anticipated with the current 9th grade leaving the middle school and the current 7th grade coming to the middle school. And that this trend will continue when we look at our 4 towns in the elementary enrollments. This will continue we feel confident for 7 years, right? Because we know those enrollments from kindergarten on up. So it'll be more of the same moving forward. And, you know, I also want to note that seventh grade is a lot of times a year where some families choose other options, and oftentimes like private schools start in that grade level. And so we always have, you know, some attrition like that. So this doesn't strike me as anything atypical, not just for this district, but for other districts as well. Charter school, we get these kind of pre-enrollment numbers, and they look pretty similar to the prior year's pre-enrollment numbers. We don't get really good data until a little later in the year, usually in December. We get real enrollment data, but our pre-enrollment information and the projections we get from DESE was pretty identical to what we've gotten over the last couple of years. But I've learned not to rely too heavily on the pre-enrollment numbers, or they call it early enrollment numbers, I think, and really wait till December, where, you know, that October 1 count is captured, and that's a much more accurate count. Not totally accurate as some of our Pelham friends may remember and otherwise, but it's much closer.
Thank you. Margaret, go ahead.
So I just have a couple of observations. I did spend some time looking at the courses, and I wanted to say that I was really impressed by the variety that's available in the art department, the music department, and the tech ed department, and the enrollment numbers in all of those things. And the art in particular, I think the enrollment was 1,000 for the 2 semesters, was just over 1,000 students enrolled in the art classes. And I think that's something that speaks to what you can get at the Amherst High School that you might not get in other places. There really is pretty much something for everybody if you look at that section of the course list.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I feel like if I could get everyone in our community and surrounding communities to just read this document, it would be such a success, because the range of courses is amazing. I also want to highlight the return of Prep Academy, because it relates to an earlier conversation. Prep Academy is a course that supports students to take more challenging courses over their time at the high school. And it's really intended for students who we feel like are high promise and need some support about what the expectations are in challenging courses at the high school. And so, you know, seeing the enrollment of Prep Academy is really heartening to me, because it's something that we've sort of had on and off, and sometimes there's interest and sometimes there's budget, and but we know that that's a beneficial thing. And, you know, seeing the enrollment, and, you know, those are low number, you know, we try not to have those classes be too large because they're very intensive, but being able to offer those. But I agree with Margaret. You look at the arts classes, like I referenced earlier, look at computer science and how many students are engaging. And a course at some quarter on computer science is really high, and the theater arts and the different electives within the core academic areas is phenomenal. So, you know, if I could get a way to, buy an ad in the Gazette and just put this document somehow in tiny font and have people read it. It really is such an array and a wonderful experience that our students have at our high school. Having the student numbers really matters. One of the advantages of going to the block schedule is it offers 2 more electives a year for our students, and you can see that in the what courses students are taking. If you really want to do some work and compare it to a couple of years ago, you've seen this expansion in students taking courses that we want them to take. We want well-rounded kids, right? And we want to promote that. And it's just, I get really excited looking at. I know this is like a small font, lots of data, but this is one of the ones I get really excited looking at.
Peter, go ahead.
So, I mean, I'm very tempted to move to run an ad in the Gazette, exactly like you just said. And I'm only like 40% joking. Like, I really love absolutely everything that Margaret just said, and I'm glad that you followed up on that theme of like, we have to find a way, and if it means using ARPA money in the middle of this year, if it means putting it in the budget next year, if it means doing a roadshow where we talk about this very issue to our member towns, then that's what we need to do. Like, if you juxtapose this with the other aspect that you were just talking about, where historically the cohorts are declining, right? And so it's going to be harder to sustain this. It's already pretty amazing that we have this variety given our enrollment numbers, and that it's a testament to to how well the finances are run in the district. It's a testament to the support level that our member towns give to us, because they value this and because our community pays the taxes, and in order to provide that support level, since because education is a community value. But if we don't market and advertise proactively this stuff, it's going to go away. Like, it will go away in 7 years to some significant degree if we don't proactively market it. I mean, I feel after 6 years on the committee, that's a pretty obvious truth to my observation. And further, we talk about the arts enrollment. It's the reality is that our direct market competition, the most severely impacts the regional budget, is to a charter school that bills itself as a performing arts charter school. Now, I know students and families select charter schools for a number of different reasons, and it's not all about what are you offering for arts courses. But the fact that we're able to invest to the degree that we have in these courses and offer that variety has a huge effect on that. So if we were to lose that, it would become this spiral, right? Where we're going to lose. You lose one kid to a charter school over 6 years at the region, that's over 120 grand, like, out of the budget, and that would impact services, and then more kids leave because we have you know the drill. I'm preaching to the choir, I know, about but I do think that we've talked a lot as these issues come up about doing something to be more proactive about marketing and promoting before it goes away. And I just hope that we can start even little by little doing some different things to try and communicate that out to the community.
I just want to add that I'm unapologetically biased, but I would be willing to go ahead and write up the ad for our engineering offerings. Like, I had the opportunity to attend and speak to the engineering for social good class, and like, I don't know, personally, I'll break out the pom-poms. I will be the cheerleader for that, and a bunch of other awesome courses that we have too. Allison, go ahead.
I second that on the engineering, because that's what actually I predicted the arts. I mean, I'm familiar with it, so it was nice to see that in the numbers. But what was new to me and very interesting was the number of students that are engaged in the engineering curriculum and how many different courses there are in that engineering curriculum. So that was. I share that sentiment. I wonder, I mean, not to discount an idea of an ad, but there's so many ways that we can get this information out beyond an eye chart buried in a board docs agenda. And I just wonder if, there's some version of this that you could put on the website for the high school, as sort of the first thing that you see before you dive into and download the detailed course of study, or whatever that course catalog is called, because that's a gem in and of itself, but you have to read the whole thing. And I think it's nice about this chart, and maybe a simplified version of it could be on that landing page, just to give an overview of here's the current year and the current course offering and the number of students that are taking them, so that folks can really see the diversity as well as the engagement of our students in that diversity of classes. So I think, pulling it up out of board docs and putting it on the high school website would be a huge start. And our local press is always happy to run columns written by members of our school committees. So I think that, that's another option as well, without spending any money. So just throwing out ideas, and I'd be happy to partner with anybody on any of those. So
Seconded that. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, so we'll move on to the draft of superintendent goals.
Yep, I'll bring those up. So I struggled with this. I want to be. It's a funny thing to say as a qualifier, but I struggle for a couple reasons. One is I wanted the goals to match the conversation and dialogue. I also recognized that I had 5 goals for one of my other committees, and we have 8 total goals, and my friends in Pelham need some space to create specific goals. So, you know, I don't know if this is something I'm struggling with, and I'm open to feedback. It's intentionally an initial draft. It's not something that I'm even asking for or would consider a vote of this body on tonight. But you know, I just want to be clear that sort of managing the 8 total goals between the 3 districts is a challenge for me this year. So the first goal is really looking at that 6th grade to the middle school work. And while that is primarily work of another district, it certainly has impact at the middle school. So Mary Kiley, our curriculum coordinator, today met with a couple members of the middle school leadership team, because the coordination of that, all those decisions have an impact at the middle school. So that one probably needs to be reworded, but I think that's important to this committee. But I'm not sure if it should be a goal of this committee or not. It's just something that I'm struggling with. The second one is directly related. It had the number 2 and number 3 were the most common commented on, areas of priority at the last meeting. One about the capital plan and one about safety, security, and belonging. The fourth one is related to budget and how do we engage different critical groups in the school committee's efforts around the budget. And the last one, which I'll scroll down for because I realize it's cut off, is focused on some DEI next steps for our district. But this is not a fully cooked document, and certainly I'm interested in feedback from the committee on your thoughts about this. What makes sense to add, delete, revise. Because I was trying to work within some constraints of the multiple districts, and I hit some roadblocks in it. And I'm not sure this is exactly, the direction that folks are looking for. So I'll stop talking and hear some feedback or answer some questions that people in the committee might have.
Sarah Bess.
So first, thank you for taking all of the words we chucked at you to make this into an excellent first draft. So I think in a couple of meetings I mentioned adding mental health awareness to this. I think it probably could fit into that, number 3, because I think mental health falls in line with your safety and security and belonging in the schools. But I would really appreciate if that could specifically be called out, because I think that's important. I think we're going to be dealing with some COVID hangover trauma for a while. Plus, I think, the world is moving in a way where mental health is part of your overall health. And I think we should really be a part of that. I think it is good for us and our kids and school and the community as a whole. So thank you.
Anyone else? Peter, go ahead.
So yeah, I appreciate also your collecting our many rounds of words that we threw at you into a manageable document. I totally get the issue with the manageable goals, and I'm glad that we have that constraint, because I'm glad that's part of the contract, that we have max 8 goals per the 3 districts, because otherwise we would be not setting you up for success, and therefore not setting the district up for success, because we wouldn't be utilizing your time as efficiently. So it's it's a constraint that is good that it's there, and so now we just need to figure out how to align it in. And of course, you look at a lot of these items here, and it's it raises the age-old question of what is a goal, because I fully expect that to some degree you're going to be working on all of these this year. It's not like we're going to advance the district staff diversity goals and suddenly you're not going to do anything on diversity. I would, that's not going to happen, obviously. And so it becomes a question of what do we want to focus on. So just a couple of thoughts, no real crazy solutions. Maybe on the 6th grade one, it could focus more on what that's going to be from the region's point of view. So for example, we still have an agreement we have to hash out with the Amherst School Committee about shared space and staff and what that means and whatnot. And I think it was at this committee you alluded to, once we get into that, we may need to have to look at what it means to eventually update the regional agreement. And that kind of has a Venn diagram overlap with the assessment method and what you're trying to do with what we're all trying to do with the guardrails and stabilizing on the full statutory. So for example, if you took number 2 and you just replaced capital plan with assessment method, further develop and refine the long-term assessment method and engage stakeholders, like you're already doing that to a degree with Doug. And that might be something that is already rolling that you wouldn't have to figure out. I mean, I'm the one who twice brought up the long-term capital plan, so I'm not saying that's not a priority. And I've heard you mention that before as well. And I'm sure other members are concerned about it. So I'm not saying it's not important. But I'm trying to think of ways that leverage things that are already have some momentum. I'm also mindful always that, we're 3 months already, 25% down with the fiscal year that we're expecting you to accomplish these things in. So it would be nice to leverage some of the efforts that you've already put in on some things. Yeah. So no wonderful solutions, but hopefully that helps refine things a bit.
Thank you. Allison.
Lost my cursor. Yeah, I think I agree that the constraint is good, because even 5 for one district is a lot. So I will acknowledge that, and I'm wearing my region hat, not not another committee hat. But I do think that that's important. I think one of the things I've mentioned this a few times, so I apologize for sort of being just grinding at it again. But a lot of work went into drafting that strategic plan for the district. And if I don't know how many of you all that participated or have watched sort of the goal setting workshops that MASC has presented for school committee members, but one of the things that that's just sort of inherent in setting annual goals, or if it's 2-year whatever period goals are, is that it's linked to sort of your long-term vision and long-term goals for the district and the schools. And so I think by sort of having that strategic plan and just sort of letting it sit there in the library and not using that as a way to guide sort of what are we doing in this particular, because the ideal state would be that the annual goals are really the distillation of saying, okay, looking at that strategic plan, what from there really needs to be accomplished in this year in order for us to get to that point in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever the time frame is for that strategic plan. That's sort of the ideal state with goal setting and strategic planning. So I do think that I don't know if it's going to solve the 8 maximum constraint that we have, but I think it can really help, because I was looking at it, and I'm happy to share my screen, but if you're looking for it, it's when you're in board docs, if you go to the library section, then click into strategic goals, and then there's strategic planning, and you'll see the full document there. But if you look at it, there's objectives, and my memory is foggy about sort of what the objectives and the goals or whatever, how they connect with each other, but the objective A is increase and maintain staff diversity to reflect student diversity. Well, that's one of the goals that Mike's proposed in his annual goals. We have objective B is strengthen instructional practices to foster student engagement and connection to teachers and to the school, which kind of relates a little bit to that well-being one. But then there's actually objective D, which is prioritize the emotional well-being of students while maintaining high expectations for success. So between those two, that sort of captures what we've been talking about, wanting to have that as a focus for this year. And then if you get down to objective F, it's upgrade educational and extracurricular facilities to meet the needs of every learner and program. So I'm not saying that we can just say meet the strategic goals and then that sort of covers everything, because I think, you know, to help Mike and help us, we'll want to stipulate which of the key things within that we'd want to be focusing on in this particular year. But I do think that we can, you know, both do a better job for articulating that's, you know, that strategic plan, and sort of streamlining our goal setting process on an annual basis if we're looking to that as a guiding document to help us. And then of course you're going to have we'd have sort of the individual year things that maybe weren't envisioned in that strategic plan, like moving sixth grade to the middle school and having to come up with um, you know, what is that agreement with the Amherst Elementary District in terms of what that looks like once the sixth graders are in the building. Um, I know that's not really proposing a precise solution, um, but I do wonder if sort of framing, like there's one sort of I like, you know, that sixth grade objective where you have an overarching objective, and then you have some sub bullet points that sort of describe the specific actions. It could be something that there's a goal that's the big goal is, you know, work on implementing key components of the ARPS district strategic plan, and then your sub bullets are, you know, work on the capital plan, work on the you know, what progress you're going to make on some of those key objectives within the strategic plan.
Thank you. And Craig.
Just a couple of comments. I think with so many goals, I agree with what's been said before. It's difficult, and you're coming here saying you want some help with what to prioritize. You know, capital planning is a big one. I picked that one first just because it's a big one, but it's also one that is in a different time space continuum than student needs, for example. So it could be, it brought an idea to my head, and you're an excellent manager with phenomenal staff. So if certain goals could be seen as delegated for a certain amount of time. So for example, and I also think this committee, I can't speak for everyone, but I would imagine people would welcome presentations on certain subjects that aren't on the annual cycle review, but that are special. They pop up at meetings occasionally, maybe 2, 3, 4 a year. I don't know, where you've got the principal talking about student needs, you've got the Doug talking about capital, and that's a place for you to review our feedback. And it's still your responsibility. They're still your goals, but you're working with the whole team and perhaps spreading out over 2, 3 years. Maybe not. Maybe they're 5-year goals. I can't speak to that exactly, but. And I don't mean to, I'll stop there because this is management. This is your job, not mine at all. But it's just a thought of a way to lighten the load off of you a little bit while keeping things moving.
Yeah, and the little bit that I had to add is kind of a reframing of. First, I applied this to like the 5B, right? Create safe spaces and experiences and other opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I like the concept of safe spaces. Like it's great when you're weathering the storm to have a safe place. But my sister introduced the concept to me like a few years ago, the concept of brave spaces where people can speak out and kind of actually have that support. And I think it also applies to 3 with in terms of student safety and security. Like, right, like we need to offer them the opportunity and the spaces to be not just safe, but to be able to point things out where we aren't doing the right things in terms of making them safe, right? Because I can think that I'm doing something to make someone feel safe, but if I offer them the opportunity to tell me, no, you're actually not being effective, I think that's very important. But yeah, that's really my 2 cents, and I definitely support the idea of the long-term strategic plan, actually looking at capital, and I'll try not to overstep my bounds and say too much about that. But
no, that's really, thank you for all those comments. It is really helpful. It gives me food for thought to kind of do some pretty significant revisions and bring something back in 2 weeks for you all to consider and potentially vote on.
perfect. So I see Doug there. for the fiscal year 22 fourth quarter report.
Yep. And I think, Doug, you should be able to share your screen, unless you'd like me to do it, but you should be able to do that now.
Hopefully it's coming up as we speak here. And is that large enough for everyone to see? We'll mostly focus on the grid tonight. As far as that, I can make it a little larger if it needs to be. If anyone wants to give me a little more feedback on size. Hopefully that's. I want to try to capture all of it and still show fourth quarter, just so people know. But I can make it a little bigger. So if you can't see something, let me know, and I'll adjust the size a little bit more. But just to speak to the fourth quarter a little bit, we made some adjustments very late in June at a meeting on the 28th to hopefully try to balance things out, and for all the work that we did to try to have a sense of that, we still weren't quite exactly on the mark with that, and so there are some areas where you can see in the budget where even though we moved some money, we didn't need to, or we needed to move some more. So needless to say, the long story short is that we did finish under budget by a total of $687,094, which is a pretty significant amount under budget. It's 2.2%. It's a little larger number than I think we'd really like, but at the same time, it's not too bad in that regard. It will put pressure on whether our E&D would exceed its limit of 5% of the operating of the total budget, not just the operating budget, the operating and capital budget. 5% of that is allowed to be reserved in our E&D. But we are using a significantly larger amount of E&D in this current fiscal year to help support our budget. So that'll help offset the sort of inflow from this budget finishing under the projected amount. A couple of things I'll point out relative to this fourth quarter. In our salary area, we moved some funding out of just the base salaries, and so that ended up having our budget finish almost right on the money. We knew our substitutes expenses would be a little higher as we went into the end of the year. That carried through June a little more strongly than I expected. So that number of being under budget is a little larger than I was anticipating when we talked and moved some money around in late June. And in the contracted area, we knew our budget was coming in a good place, and so we had resources available. We finished school early enough that there was a couple of weeks at the end of June that were available, and there were opportunities that we asked our principals to connect with their staff about, and to offer some educational opportunities for professional development and summer work sort of opportunities that they took advantage of in the last couple of weeks of June. And so that kind of snuck in some additional work from our staff, and they're willing to do it in the last month of the year to get some of the preparatory work done for the coming year, and also just to support them in growing them professionally as well. On the expense side, I think the big things I'll point out here are really in two areas. One is special education. We transferred in $500,000 in anticipation of needing significantly more resources there, and it turned out that we didn't end up needing those as much. We had a pretty significant number of funds that were encumbered or reserved for payment to expenses we thought we would have that didn't materialize. And likewise in risk and benefits, we came in pretty significantly under budget there. And I think with the special education, I think that's a little artifact of some of the things we were trying to finish up in the latter part of the year, and some staffing that were changing at that time, and so the ability to manage those accounts and close out unneeded encumbrances was a little later than was expected. So that kind of ended up having us reserve more money into that budget area in particular than was necessary. I think on the risk and benefits, what it really speaks to there, and I think this also is less obvious but still showing in the salaries piece as well, is how we hire people has changed a bit over the last couple of years. We've done more hiring. Just total number of new hires has been a lot greater, and I think there's a larger amount of turnover in staff, and I want to look into that and explore that a little bit with my colleagues in HR, because I think how we model some things changes significantly when we have that kind of change. When you have a stability of staff, the carry from one year to the next, things like health insurance carry through the summer and carry through the full year. And when you have staff that come on and go off of employment with us, while our total FTE of staff may stay fairly constant, some of the costs that go with those staff have ramp up and ramp down changes that aren't being mimicked well here, and so we're overrepresenting perhaps our need for insurance costs, that type of thing. So I was looking at that a little bit earlier today and seeing that we need how we model those projections of risk and benefits is probably not going to need to be fine tuned, because we're in a different place than we were a few years ago relative to our staffing. In the course of last year, sort of from the first pay period to the fourth or fifth, we increased the number of people on staff by about 15 FTE, which means we were hiring well into the school year, which we kind of knew that would happen. Well, that delay in hiring, which is difficult for us as far as providing what we need to the students, also limits how much we spend, and limits how much we're spending on things like insurance. So those factors, and if that will be the model we need to identify with in the coming years. In other words, if it's going to continue to be difficult to have ourselves fully staffed right on the first day, and to have, there's some of that always happens, but it's been a little more pronounced the last couple of years. If that's going to persist, then how we model that and project those expenses in our budgets will need to be modified so that we're more accurate and have a little bit less of an underage when we get to the end of the fiscal year. So I just want to comment on those things a little bit, because I think that the last couple of years we've had quite a bit of volatility in a variety of things, expenses, external funding sources and the like, but also last year being more toward a norm of what we've experienced. We're still well under budget, and so I'm just trying to look for and trying to identify some of those things that we'll want to be looking at as we begin to budget for fiscal 24, so that we accurately reflect what our needs are and where those needs are within our budget. So I think I'll stop there and see if anybody has any specific questions about quarter 4, but then also about some of these other ideas I've put out there for people to think about a little bit.
Peter, go ahead.
So yeah, thank you for putting this together and the explanations provided. I think all aspects of the regional school district budget construction is a constant learning process. So you never stop learning about what E&D is and school choice funding and all that. So I appreciate the explanations that you sprinkle throughout there. So obviously it's great to see that we are 687,000 under budget as opposed to the other direction. So that's very good. And I understand the basic mechanism that by default that goes to E&D, which is your can think of it loosely as free cash that can be ported over to the next year up to 5% and used to support next year's budget. But am I correct that there's no legal statute that would prevent the school committee from allocating some of those funds for other purposes? Like, for example, say we wanted to take $50K and apply it like this to be used this year, the school year, for marketing and promotion purposes, or if we wanted to take another portion of that and allocate it to saving up for a large capital expense like the track. So I'm just trying to understand what our options are. I'm not like I wouldn't motion anything tonight with 2 people not here and a third on a plane who might not have the greatest connection, but I just want to understand what the options are.
So there are some limitations. So in the circumstance of expending that E&D for some purpose that would be considered a change in the budget or an increase to the budget, so whether it be for a capital project or for other things within the operating budget, you really can't do that unless you get permission from all 4 towns. So they vote the overall budget, and so we have to stay within that. Now, that being said, it could be a circumstance, there are changes within that you could do. So we could potentially, reduce assessments and use more E&D, and that could be a vote of school committee to do that. And then, reductions are generally allowed without needing all 4 towns to agree. Increases, particularly budgets, are are a little more problematic and need all 4 towns to meet and agree to it. That being said, one of the things we can do, and this is, it's interesting earlier when you're talking about superintendent's goals and talking about capital planning and that sort of thing. One of the other things is if we continue to sit at right at the limit of 5%, is we can certainly in our budget planning, we typically use some amount of E&D to support the operating budget, but there's nothing that prevents us from, as we budget fiscal 24, putting a block of E&D money into capital spending. So it can absolutely be used for that purpose and has in the past. So we could do that. It'll be most likely that we would do that as part of our budgeting for fiscal 24. Would be the least difficult thing to do, I guess, in that regard.
Greg?
Thank you so much. Simply because I am new to regional districts and the funding, I'm not familiar with E&D. I did some Googling right before Peter asked the question. I wouldn't have been able to frame the question the same way, but I got so much information. If you could just give me a brief definition of E&D, and then the only question I have about it currently is if there's a cap on how much can be in that account at any given time.
So E&D stands for excess and deficiency. It does mirror in town, municipal budgets and municipal finance. It mirrors reserves, which are typically held in 2 different forms, whether it be free cash or stabilization funds. This operates much more like free cash, and so it is a reserve. It's a bank account that we have. Unlike cities and towns who don't formally have a limit on how much free cash they accumulate. They generally sort of have policies relative to that. So for example, in Amherst, they try to have between 5 and 15%. Right now, they're well above that because they're setting aside money in their reserves for some capital projects. But in regional schools, there's a strict limit on how big that number is allowed to grow. So you can't sort of just keep squirreling away money indefinitely, because then the rationale is that, well, then quit assessing your towns, use some of the money, right? So but how you use that money is really up to the school committee, and through the budget process we can use it for the support of just regular operating, and then also for capital projects. And so we typically have a small amount, 280,000, that we set aside for contingency. So worst case scenario, something happens really big, we have that amount in our budget available to spend for those purposes. We have something significant happen that we just need to deal with in a short term that's not formally budgeted in a regular accounting line. We do have that sort of money available for use. We try not to touch that unless it's really truly an emergency or something else doesn't come to fruition like we think it will. But the other parts of E&D are certainly available. Like we have typically about 500,000. This year we got a little higher number of that E&D that we use, and that reduces the amount of assessment we have each town. So as we're using it as a sort of dampening effect as we go through and budget from one year to the next. So
quickly, you can both include E&D as a revenue source in a budget.
Yep.
And are you able to use, or is this, I'm imagining the school committee is responsible for yay or nay whether to use it, whether it's in a budget, or can you use it as an extraordinary source of revenue that is not in the budget? If you approach an excess in budget rather than a deficit, which you just experienced, can you throw E&D money at it without revising the budget and assessment for 4 towns?
The short answer is no, you can't. If you choose to use, and that's part of why in our budgeting we tend to set aside a small block that we call contingency, to give the school committee the flexibility to use it for some extreme or emergency circumstance. So we have a block that calls contingency funding from E&D, and it's typically we've set it at 280,000. So that's as close as you can, but that's formally budgeted. And so anything where you're going to spend it, you still have to formally budget the use, whether it be from E&D or any of the other revenue sources. So as we do our budget, it does require all 4 towns to agree to that, because it is, not everything, but some of what creates E&D is money from assessments to the 4 towns. So it is collectively the 4 towns' money, and therefore under their purview to agree or disagree with the totality of spending. The specifics of how it's spent is under the control of the school committee, obviously.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding FY22 fourth quarter? All right. Thank you, Doug. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We will move on to future agenda planning. We have the
Yep, I can display the document. Sorry. What I have from prior conversations is my goals, the MOA draft from CRES, between CRES and the district. We did a solar study last year that was partially funded by the good work of our state representative, Mindy Dom. And so we'd like to present that well ahead of kind of next year's capital. There was a request for student cell phone discussion. And the calendar for next year, I'm awaiting feedback from the APA, which is our process by contract. But we have 3 drafts ready, and I can at least present them to this body as we await feedback from our bargaining unit. That's what I have. Certainly, we could add anything. You can see the meeting 2 weeks after that. If there is more discussion with the CRES MOA, I want to put a placeholder on. There was some question about returning to in-person school committee meetings, and a longer conversation on safety, both internal and external safety. So that's kind of the topics I have, but open to any other thoughts that anyone have. Doug, I'm looking at you too for our first quarter budget. Typically that's early November, so I may add that live to this. But open to any feedback, responses on other things should be added, moved, deleted, anything.
Peter, go ahead.
My preference is to have an item for bus arrival times, discussion, possible vote, sooner rather than later. Just because I feel like we need to push to resolve it. That's my pitch for why we should schedule it soon. I'm not trying to leverage agenda planning for opinionating.
Oh, sorry, Margaret.
At some point, hopefully we will have some results from the budget survey to share. I don't know time frame on that, but something.
I put a placeholder for November 29th. Certainly doesn't have to be that date, but I think that gives a healthy amount of time for the survey to go out, get feedback, and gives committee time to do some analysis. Does that sound okay, Margaret?
Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Sure. And if we were ready earlier, we could perhaps move it up earlier in November.
Sure.
Okay.
Peter, go ahead.
Somewhat related to a couple of items earlier. If we could get an update on like the ARPA spending plan. In the past, I don't think we've run votes because it's usually been consensus based on proposals and feedback. But given a couple of items that came up tonight, it may be worthwhile to look at the plan, what the balance left there is, and is there available funds for some other items.
Yep. And Allison?
I realize this is more the town and other folks working on this, but I think an update on fundraising around the track project would be helpful to have, because we have a decision on our plate early in January. And I think getting that getting some sort of sense of how it's going well before that can just help us prepare for that decision point in January. So I don't know who would need to be present to present that. I don't know if that's Dan from the Dave, sorry, from the town, or folks from the boosters, but that would be helpful to have sort of a presentation on that.
Did I see another hand from Margaret, or am I making that up? Or okay.
I took it down.
All right. All right. Then if there was anything else anyone felt compelled to add, you can go ahead and email me or Dr. Morris there. Oh, also want to acknowledge Stephen. How you doing, Mr. Sullivan? Then we'll move on to the warrant report, but we don't have Irv here to read warrants. So we can move on to accepting gifts. Am I missing something on my board docs, or does anyone else see gifts there? No gifts. So that being the case, I move that the regional school committee will now consider entering executive session in accordance with the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA and APAA if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body in the chair so declares, and I do, and to approve minutes in accordance with the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22, with no intention of returning to open session. Take a roll call vote on that.
Second.
Oh, seconded by Peter, and then now we will take a roll call vote. All right, so Jennifer. We'll move on to Stephen.
Sorry, I'm here. Jennifer, I.
Oh, yeah.
Sullivan, I.
And Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, I.
Craig.
Craig, I.
And Peter.
Peter, I.
Allison.
Clicking. Allison, I.
Margaret.
Margaret, I.
And Ben, I as well. The motion passes unanimously, and there's some things we have to do here.